look at a related one called the log files. And then what the log file does is that it keeps records of all your Stata commands and output in a given session, with the exception of graphs. So what it means is that apart from graph that you cannot save on your log file, you see every command or work you've done as far as your analysis is concerned in the log file. If you indicate the system to open a log file for you on whichever analysis you are undertaking. And I must emphasize that if you are using Stata, it is always important to open a log file. Why it is important is that you can always refer back to it, especially if you are analyzing data for manuscript or if you are analyzing data for your thesis. It is always good to keep a log file because your supervisor or even a reviewer can ask you to go back and do some corrections. In terms of thesis, if it's your supervisor who is requesting for something like this, then you can easily share the log file with the supervisor for him or her to know how you achieve the specific results that you are adding to your thesis or your data sets. So to open the log file, there are two options. You can either use the drop-down menu or you can also use the command. So with this one, I'm going to demonstrate that for you to see before we move on. So this is my Stata interface. And then assuming I want to start my analysis and I want to keep a log of all that I want to do, I can either use the command window, which is here, or I can use the drop-down menu, which is this one. So with my Stata, I'm currently using Stata 14. I have to upgrade. I'm currently using Stata 14. So up here, I have my open, my save, print. So the print is if I want to print anything from my resource window. And then with the log file, I can use this to open the log file. But you can see that the begin and then the append are not active because I've already opened a log file, which is this. So if I want to close it, I can click on suspend here. And then you see that the same thing that I would have typed if I wanted to use the command window, it has appeared here. So assuming I want to open it again, I can use log using new analysis. And then it tells me that the log file is already open. So let me use capture log close. So it has beautifully closed the log file for me. So I'm assuming that I want to start the whole process. So let's first of all use the drop-down menu, right? Can you mute this person for us? Thanks. So if I want to use the drop-down menu, if I want to use the drop-down menu, I'll just come here and then click on begin. Then it will tell me to save as. So I can give it a name. Maybe save as. Assuming it's my thesis analysis or thesis descriptive analysis. Then I can give it a name like this. Then here, you have the option to indicate where you want to save it to. Then I can, if I want to save it in my Google Drive, or if I want to specify the specific working directory that I'm working, in, then I can just choose where I want to save it to. But assuming I want to save it on my Google Drive, I'll just go straight and then save it. So you see here beneath, it tells us the log and then where it is saved or the path. And a log file is with the extension SMCL. So if you see SMCL, then it is telling us that it is a log file. It tells me the date that it was opened. So it was opened on 2nd March. We are currently in 2nd March, so don't be confused. It was opened on 2nd March 2024, and the time is 6:27 a.m. So the date is also important because you can always look at when the log file was opened to help you to trace whichever thing you want to trace in your analysis. And assuming I want to close it now, I can go back to the review window and then just use my command to close it, capture log close. Remember, to use the command is capture log space close. So assuming if I add this together, it will not close. You see that it is still on. My log file is still on. But if I space it like this, it's going to close. So always be mindful of the spaces and even word characters as you use Stata. But for today's session, we are not going to emphasize that. But this is just a word of caution to most of us as we try to learn how to use Stata. So that's about the log file. Now let's go to the next very important item as well. So I'm going back to my slides and I'll come back to my Stata window. Okay, the next important thing that is also similar to the log file is do file. But the do file to me is very, very important. It keeps track of all your commands, or that is where you save your commands that you use for your analysis. And to do that, I'm going to also demonstrate it for you to see. And the reason why we keep the do files are just to make it easy for you to reproduce whatever you've done. And then also you can easily share a do file with someone to check whether what you've done is correct or not. So in most cases, just like I use the thesis or writing a paper as an example, a journal can ask you to attach your do file of a paper that you've submitted to them for them to check whether what you've done is correct or not, or just to ensure transparency's sake. So the do file is very important in that regard. Your supervisor might also want to check the do file to see whether the steps you've indicated you used to analyze your data is correct or not. And remember, Stata is command-based. So even the commands that you used, your supervisor might want to check whether the commands were the appropriate commands you used or not. With a DHS, for instance, we have a related term called weighting. So if you indicated that you used weighting in your analysis, someone might want to know how the weighting was done, or even the commands that you used to achieve the weighting results. And we always recommend that you use a do file when you are using Stata. And the do file extension is .do. So let me demonstrate that now for you to see. Okay, so with the do file too, you have the option to use either the drop-down menu or the command window. So if you check up here, I have my log file viewer graph and then do editor. The next one is data editor, which we'll look at before we close. So if I want to use the drop-down menu to open my do file, I'll just click on the new do file editor and it will appear like this. So you have the opportunity to type whatever you want to type in here, and you have the opportunity to also save it. So if I want to save my do file, I'll just click on the save. I'll just click here, save, and then it will prompt me to give it a file name, save as. So I might want to say, I want to save it as my thesis analysis. I sometimes prefer to use dates. So maybe 2_3 2024. Then it will ask you to indicate where you want to save it to. Remember, we're talking about working directory. You can either shift it to your working directory or a place that you can easily pick it up when the need arises. So I mostly save my stuff in my Google Drive just to ensure that I save it in a cloud. So I have saved my do file. Assuming I now want to write my codes or my commands. And the beautiful thing about the do file is that you can always type in it. So I mostly prefer to give the date. So maybe my thesis analysis, then my date 2/3/2024. And to comment on or write your comments or notes, you have to use the star. And then the star, you can just use one, or if you want to use as many stars as possible. I'll give specific explanations to this one in the slides that I have provided. And if I want to come down, I'll just use the enter key to come down to where I want to type. And you can see that as I come down, it's giving me lines. It's giving me lines. So from line 1 up to line 27. So assuming I already have a do file that maybe I picked from a friend that I want to see how he or she did the analysis, I can also in that do file to see how the person did the analysis. Or if I'm starting from afresh, then I can now start to write my command here. Then I'll execute them subsequently to achieve the results that I want to achieve. So assuming maybe I have a do file already, let's see how I can open that. Sorry, my system is a bit slow, but that's all right. So if you look at the DHS, they have kept their do file here. And in their do file, they've stipulated all the things they've done to achieve, how they label the variables, and then right from the start to the last one. So you see that the first thing they kept here was label. So that is a command they use to label the variable case ID. So remember when I was showing you how the DHS variables are, it was starting with the variable case ID. So the command they used to label it was label variable case ID, and then in parentheses, case identification. That's how that is done. So assuming I want to look at how some of the things are here, then I can also adopt a similar way to label my variables. Or if I want to see a specific analysis, then I can look at this one and come back to my do file. So I can even copy some of the commands. So for instance, if I want to copy this one, I can easily just copy this and then come here and paste them like this to achieve whatever I want to achieve. And we'll practicalize these things in our next session next week. So you see that if I want to execute this one, I'll just click here, or I can also copy it back to the command window in my Stata file, in my Stata interface. But one thing I need to emphasize is that depending on the system you are using, if you are using Mac, the system is a bit different from the Windows users. So with Mac, you can always dock your do file and then your command window or your main Stata interface. But with Stata on Mac, you might have to switch between the windows beneath your start menu or something. So always take note of the differences when you are using these things, because there are slight differences for those who are using Mac and those who are using Windows. So back to my slides. So I just kept this do file here as an example for you to see. So if you look at this one that I did on breastfeeding, the first thing I said was log using breastfeeding. And you remember I spoke to you about the log file. So I wanted to ensure that I keep track of all the activities or the analysis that I did in my log file. And the next thing I kept here was my note, early or timely initiation of breastfeeding, the definition. And I said it was defined as the proportion of children aged 0 to 23 months who were put to the breast within the first hour of birth. And how will I achieve that? So the variable in the data set that I wanted to use was use HW1 variable and drop if HW1 is greater than 24. So I wrote all my commands here, including the weighting, and then how I can set my data as a survey data set before I proceeded with my analysis. Another thing that I need to also emphasize is that with a do file, if you want to comment, the comments will always appear as green. So if you see any green thing in your do file, it means it's there as a comment. If you execute it, it will not come as a command. But commands are in blue. So if you look at this recode that I did here, which was recoding variable 850, it appeared as blue with the variable names in black. But my comments were all in green. And if you see red, it's telling us that it's a name or it's a string. So here, I indicated that main independent variable was empowerment, which I achieved by recoding V743. And I said in the system, it should use 1 as 1. And then I gave it the name respondent alone, and 2 to 6 as 0, not alone. So the names of the specific indicators of this variable V743 were either respondent alone or not alone, which I gave names. So the names are in red. And to run the commands that I might have written in my do file, there are also two options to do that. It's either, and this is also a bit different for Mac users and Stata users. So please take note as you use Stata. We'll demonstrate that in our subsequent session as well. So with Mac users, you can find the execute command up here. So let me go back again to my Stata interface for you to see what I'm talking about. So this is my do file. And assuming I've written a command like tablet v012, and I want to execute it, I can put my cursor on the left side like this, and then I'll come and click on my do, which is the execute command. So if you are using a Windows machine, the do will appear as execute. That's the slight difference. So I can click on my do, and then let's see whether I'll see the results here or not. So if I go back to my results window, it has tabulated the variable current age for us. Or I can just copy this and come and place it in my command window and then press enter. That's another way. But it is always advisable that if you are working in the do file, always run all your commands there before you come to your results window to see. You can also run or highlight commands together and then run them at a go. So if, for instance, I also have another one, tablet v, let me see, v103, v103. I can highlight these two and then click on the do here. But it tells me that, so here, you see that my v012 results came nicely, but with the second variable, v013, it tells me that there are no observations for that. So assuming I wanted to also do another analysis or see another results, I can still come down here and tabulate, maybe tab v012. If I want to do, let's say, chi-square analysis, let me pick these two variables. So I want to tabulate v130 against religion, rho chi, either chi or chi-square. Then I can just click on it like this, and then I will run it. And I can beautifully see that in my results window. So it tells me that this is just for demonstration purposes. If it were to be proper analysis, perhaps I would have recoded some of the variables and then also ensure that it appeared nicely. So these are the results that I got. And it has showed me the Pearson chi-square, the probability value or the p-value and all that. So that's how the do file works. Another thing I want to emphasize as far as this do file is concerned is how you can also use continuous lines. There are instances your command might be a very long one. So if you look at the command we have here, it was our logistic regression command. And we use the command svy logistic si dot, which was the outcome variable by the independent variables. If you type that whole command this way, it might be very long in your do file. But if I don't want it to go to that extent, I can just use 3 double lines and then break it down to appear in the next line. So if I see something like this, it will still be active. But then to do that, make sure you put a space before the double lines or the 3 lines to ensure that it is a continuous command you are still running.